Food hit her face. Mashed potatoes, gravy, cold steak. A 19-year-old billionaire's son threw it all at her while his friends filmed and laughed. She stood frozen, a waitress, 24 years old, working double shifts to pay for her dying mother's chemotherapy. He spit on her apron and called her nothing. But he made one mistake. He didn't notice the 50 Hells Angels bikers watching from the counter. Every single one of them stood it up. What happened next would break him down and rebuild him from scratch. This is that story. Subscribe now. Stay until the end. Comment your city below. Let's see how far this story travels. 4:30 a.m. Grace Miller's eyes opened before the alarm. 3 years of the same routine had trained her body better than any clock. She sat up. Her back screamed. Her feet throbbed. 12 hours on concrete floors did that to a person. She got up anyway. Bathroom, cold water, cracked mirror, 24 years old. Looked 35. One more day, she whispered. Just one more day. Her phone buzzed. Mom. Don't work too hard, sweetheart. Love you. Grace typed back. Love you too, Mama. Rest up. I'll call at lunch. She didn't mention the double shift. She didn't mention the bills piling up on the kitchen counter. Some things mothers didn't need to know. The Golden Cup Diner sat alone on a Nevada highway, faded yellow, paint flickering sign-cracked leather booths. Not much to look at. But Grace had worked here for 3 years, and it was the only thing keeping her mother alive. Breast cancer. Stage 3. Chemo wasn't cheap. No father. No savings. No safety net. Just Grace and her 2 tired hands. Morning, Grace. Harold Chen waved from behind the counter. 68 years old, built this place 40 years ago, lost his wife 5 years back. The diner was all he had left. Morning, Harold. Coffee ready. Strong enough to raise the dead. Grace laughed. Perfect. The boys will need it. She nodded toward the window. Harold looked. His face broke into a grin. Motorcycles, 50 of them. Chrome flashing in the early sun. Engines rumbling like thunder rolling across the desert. The Hells Angels had arrived. Now most folks heard Hells Angels and thought trouble. Leather, tattoos, violence. Grace used to think that too. 3 years ago, her first week on the job, they had walked in. She was terrified, hands shaking, voices cracking. But she'd smiled anyway and said, "Welcome to the Golden Cup. What can I get you?" A huge man with a gray beard had studied her face. Then he'd laughed. Most waitresses see us coming and suddenly remember they got tables in the back need cleaning. You're different. He'd stuck out his hand. Name's Jensen. They call me Mad Dog. Grace, she'd said. Grace Miller. Well, Grace Miller, you just earned yourself 50 loyal customers. And he'd meant it. Every week, sometimes twice, they came back. Coffee, eggs, stories. They tipped big. They asked about her mother. They made sure nobody, and they meant nobody, ever gave Grace trouble. To the world, they were outlaws. To Grace, they were family. Mad Dog walked through the door first. 6'4", shoulders like a tank, arms sleeved in tattoos, eyes that had seen things most people only had nightmares about. Little sister, he said, settling onto his stool. You look tired. I'm fine. Liar, he smiled. How's your mama? Grace's jaw tightened. New round of chemo. Doctors say it's working. But the bills keep coming. Mad Dog reached it into his vest, pulled out an envelope, slid it across the counter. Grace shook her head. No, I can't. You can, you will. His voice left no room for argument. Family takes care of family. She felt tears building, blinked them back hard. Thank you, she managed. Big Tommy, 400 pounds of muscle and loyalty, raised his coffee cup. To Grace, best damn waitress in Nevada. To Grace, 50 voices echoed. She laughed, wiped her eyes, and grabbed her notepad. All right, who's hungry? Morning rush came and went. Truckers, tourists, an old man reading his newspaper in the corner booth. Grace refilled his coffee 4 times without being asked. Never charged him extra. That was just who she was. Noon hit. The lunch crowd trickled in. Then Grace heard it. Engines, but not motorcycles. Cars, expensive ones. She looked out the window and felt her stomach drop. 3 black Range Rovers, a red Ferrari, a yellow Lamborghini, all gleaming, all brand new, all worth more than she'd make in 50 years. Doors open, young people spilled out. Designer clothes, designer sunglasses, designer attitudes, laughing, shoving each other, completely ignoring the 50 motorcycles parked 20 feet away. Rich kids, Harold muttered, probably lost on their way to Vegas. Grace straightened her apron. They're customers. I'll handle it. She grabbed her notepad and walked toward the door. 8 of them total, 6 guys, 2 girls, all of them looking around the Golden Cup like they'd stepped into a sewer. "Oh my God," one girl whined. "This place is literally disgusting." "Relax, Brittany," said a tall guy with perfect hair and a jawline that screamed plastic surgery. "It's authentic. We'll post about it. Slumming it on Route 66. Tons of likes." Grace approached, smiled. "Welcome to the Golden Cup. Table for 8. The tall guy turned. His eyes crawled from her face to her worn uniform to her scuffed shoes. His lip curled. "I guess," he said, "unless you have a VIP section." Snickers from his friends. Grace kept smiling. "Everyone's VIP here. Follow me." She led them to the big booth, handed out menus. Nobody looked at them. "I'll give you a minute. Can I start with drinks?" "Water," snapped one girl. "Bottled, not tap." "Sparkling," added a guy. "If you have it." Grace nodded. "And for you, sir." She looked at the tall one, the leader. He didn't look up from his phone. "Coffee. Make sure it's hot. Last place served it lukewarm. Almost sued them." "Of course, be right back." Grace walked to the counter. Her smile dropped the second her back turned. "Trouble?" Harold asked quietly. "Nothing I can't handle. We got sparkling water." "What do you think?" "That's what I thought." At the counter, Mad Dog watched the new table with narrow eyes. "Know who that is?" he asked Grace as she passed. She shook her head. "Brandon Hayes, Richard the Hayes' kid." Grace paused. "The billionaire. The one and only. Kid's famous for being a disaster. Tabloids love him. Crashed a Ferrari last year. His passenger spent 6 months in the hospital." He walked away without a scratch. Mad Dog's jaw tightened. Literally walked away. Didn't even visit her. Grace looked back at Brandon, still glued to his phone, still oblivious. "Well," she said softly, "his money spends the same as anyone else's." Mad Dog grunted. "You're a better person than he deserves, little sister." And Grace returned with drinks. Fresh coffee, nice and hot. "And I'm sorry we don't have sparkling water. I brought filtered with lemon." The girl who'd ordered it stared at the glass like it was poison. "Filtered, y'all mean tap. From our filtration system." "Disgusting. I'm not drinking tap water." "Do you know what's in water?" "I can get you, just get her a Coke," Brandon interrupted, finally looking up. He waved his hand like he was shooing a fly. "We're ready to order. We don't have all day." Grace pulled out her notepad. Orders flew at her. Burger, no bun, extra pickles, only if they're organic. Chicken salad, grilled not fried, dressing on the side, completely on the side. Steak, medium rare, medium rare. If it's overcooked, I'm sending it back. Fries, not too salty, crispy but not burnt. Grace wrote it all down, kept her face neutral. When she got to Brandon, he finally looked at her. "What do you recommend?" She smiled. "The cheeseburger is our most popular. Harold makes the patties fresh every..." "I didn't ask for a sales pitch," his voice cut like a blade. "Bring me the steak, medium. Not medium rare, not medium well, medium. Think you can handle that?" "Absolutely, sir." She turned to leave. "Hey, wait." She turned back. Brandon held up his phone, showed her a picture. White marble, crystal chandeliers, tables that cost more than her trailer. "This is where I usually eat," he said. "The Bellagio, 5 stars. Waitresses wear Armani." His eyes traveled down her stained apron. "But I guess you do what you can, right?" His friends laughed. Grace felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I'll have your food out soon," she said and walked away. Behind her, Brandon's voice carried, Did you see her face? Priceless. More laughter. At the counter, Grace gripped the edge until her knuckles went white. Harold touched her shoulder. You okay? Fine, she lied. Her hands were shaking. Push out. Mad Dog saw it. 3 years and he'd never seen Grace's hands shake. Problem? Razor asked, following his gaze. Rich kid thinks he's untouchable. Razor's eyes went cold. The Ferrari crasher. Yep. And he's messing with Grace. Mad Dog didn't answer. He just watched and waited. 20 minutes later, Grace carried out a loaded tray. Burger no bun, extra pickles, chicken salad dressing on the side, fries crispy, and your steak, sir, medium. Brandon didn't look at her. He picked up his knife, cut into the steak, studied the inside. Hey, this is overdone. Grace's heart sank. I'm sorry, and overdone. He held up a piece on his fork. This is medium well. I said medium. Grace looked at the steak. Pink center, exactly medium. I apologize. I can have the kitchen. Don't bother. He dropped the fork with a clatter. If your cook can't handle a simple steak, he'll just screw up the next one too. Can I get you something else? The cheeseburger. Are you still talking? The table went silent. Even his friends shifted uncomfortably. Grace swallowed. I was just trying to... You were trying to upsell me because you couldn't deliver what I ordered. Brandon leaned forward, eyes like ice. Do you know how much money I spent just getting here? More than you make in a year. And I can't even get a decent steak. Brandon, one friend muttered. Maybe chill. Stay out of it, Derek. Brandon's glare never left Grace. I'm talking to the help. The help. The word hung in the air like something rotten. Grace kept her voice steady. I won't charge you for the steak. She turned to leave. I'm not done. She stopped, closed her eyes, breathed, turned around. Yes, sir. Brandon leaned back, smiled, picked up his coffee, took a sip, made a face. Cold. It wasn't cold. She'd poured it fresh. I can get you a new... I don't want a new cup. He stood up. Suddenly he seemed huge. I want you to admit you don't know how to do your job. Brandon, let's just go, one of the girls said, grabbing his arm. This place sucks anyway. He shook her off. His eyes stayed locked on Grace, hungry, mean. This wasn't about the steak anymore. This was about power. Say it, Brandon ordered. Say I don't know how to do my job. Grace's throat tightened. Sir, I'm sorry you're not satisfied. That's not what I told you to say. He stepped closer. My father owns 300 restaurants. You know what happens to waitresses who treat customers like this? I'm sorry if fired. On the spot, no severance, no reference, nothing. His smile turned cruel. I'm going to call my father. Buy this pathetic dump. Fire everyone who works here, starting with you. Grace's face went pale. Harold, 68 years old, this diner was all he had. Please, she whispered. Please don't. I'll do anything. You'll what? Brandon laughed. What could you possibly do? You're nobody. You're nothing. You're just a... He grabbed his coffee cup and poured it down the front of her apron. Grace gasped. The liquid soaked through, burned her skin, but she didn't move. Brandon's friends laughed. Then Brandon reached down, grabbed a handful of food from his plate, mashed potatoes, gravy, steak, and threw it in her face. It splattered across her cheeks, her hair, her eyes. Grace stood frozen, humiliated, destroyed. The diner went dead silent. 50 Hell's Angels sat at the counter. Not one of them moved, but 50 pairs of eyes were watching. And in Mad Dog Jensen's chest, something old and dangerous woke up. Brandon wiped his hands on a napkin. Let's go. This place is pathetic. He tossed a 20 on the table. That should cover the damage. Consider it a tip. You need it. He headed for the door. His friends followed. They made it 3 steps. Son. One word. Low, quiet, heavy as a gravestone. Brandon stopped, turned. Mad Dog Jensen was on his feet. 6'4", 250, arms like pythons. Face carved from decades of hard roads and harder choices. Did you just call me son? Brandon tried to sound tough. His voice cracked. Mad Dog didn't answer, just started walking. Slow, steady, each footstep shook the floor. Behind him, chairs scraped, Razor stood, Big Tommy stood, Preacher stood, 46 more, 50 Hell's Angels, on their feet, moving as one. Brandon's friends backed toward the door. "Dude," Derek hissed, "we need to go now." But Brandon couldn't run. His pride wouldn't let him. "You got something to say," he demanded. "You know who my father is?" Mad Dog stopped 3 feet away, close enough for Brandon to see every scar, every line, every year of a life lived on the edge. "I know exactly who your father is," Mad Dog said, voice calm, almost friendly. "Richard Hayes, real estate, 4 billion net worth, mansion in Vegas, penthouse in New York, private island in the Caribbean." Brandon blinked. "Then you know." "I know your daddy started with nothing, worked construction at 16, put himself through college, built his empire brick by brick with his own 2 hands. So your father earned his money, sacrificed for it, bled for it." Mad Dog paused. "You've never worked a single day in your life, never sacrificed anything, never bled for anything. All you do is spend money someone else made. I don't have to owe him, that girl you just humiliated." Mad Dog's voice dropped lower, harder. "Her name is Grace. She's 24, works 12-hour shift, 6 days a week. Been doing it for 3 years. Know why?" Brandon said nothing. "Her mother has cancer, stage 3. Grace pays for every treatment, every pill, every hospital wait. Herself." Mad Dog leaned in. "She doesn't have a billionaire daddy to save her. She doesn't have trust funds, private jets, 300 restaurants. All she has is this wallet in 2 hands that won't quit." For the first time, something flickered across Brandon's face. Not guilt, not yet, but something. "That's not my problem," he muttered. "No, it wasn't." Mad Dog nodded slowly. "But you made it your problem. You came into her workplace, disrespected her, humiliated her, threw food in her face like she was garbage." His voice went quiet, deadly. "You did it because you could, because no one's ever made you face a consequence in your spoiled little life." "I'll call the cops." "Call them." Mad Dog spread his arms. "Go ahead. Tell them 50 bikers are threatening you. Tell them Mad Dog Jensen and the Hells Angels are causing trouble." Brandon's hand moved toward his phone. "But then Mad Dog continued. "You'll have to explain what you did, on camera, why you threw food at a young woman who's killing herself to keep her mother alive." Brandon's hand stopped. "Your daddy owns 300 restaurants," Mad Dog said. "He doesn't own this one. He doesn't own this highway. And he sure as hell doesn't own us." He stepped closer, close enough that Brandon could smell leather and engine grease and something ancient and dangerous. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to apologize to Grace, right now, in front of everyone." Brandon's jaw clenched. "And if I don't—" Silence, then Mad Dog smiled. It wasn't friendly. "Boys," he said without turning around, "how long since we took a road trip to Vegas?" "Too long," Big Tommy rumbled. "Way too long," Razor agreed. "Might be nice to visit Mr. Richard Hayes," Preacher added. "Have a chat about his son. Maybe bring some friends. Few hundred friends." Brandon's face went white. "You wouldn't try me?" Mad Dog's smile vanished. "I've been riding with these men 40 years. We've faced down cops, cartels, every kind of trouble you can name. You think we're scared of a real estate developer?" He shook his head slowly. "Your daddy built his empire on reputation, image. What happens when the world finds out his son threw food at a cancer patient's daughter? When the video goes viral, how many deals does he lose?" Brandon looked around wildly. Derek had his phone out, recording. "Delete that," Brandon snapped. "Already uploaded," Derek said, looking terrified. Mad Dog chuckled. "Clock's ticking, son. Apologize, or we do this the hard way." Brandon stood there, shaking. For the first time in 19 years, he had no power, no control, no escape. This was what helplessness felt like. This was what Grace felt every single day. "Fine," he spat. "Fine, I'll apologize." He turned toward Grace. She hadn't moved. Food still dripping down her face, eyes wide, body frozen. I'm sorry, Brandon said through clenched teeth. I'm sorry, Not like that. Brandon spun around. What? You didn't humiliate her with words. Mad Dog folded his arms. You humiliated her with actions. Your apology needs to match. He pointed at the floor. Get on your knees, look her in the eyes, and beg. I'm not going to, knees now. The words cracked like a whip. Brandon's legs buckled. He found himself on his knees, on the dirty linoleum floor, looking up at Grace Miller. She stared down at him, gravy dripping from her hair, tears streaming down her cheeks. But something else too, strength, dignity. I'm sorry, Brandon choked out. I'm sorry for what I did. I was wrong. I'm sorry. I don't know what else to say. Silence. Everyone waited. Then Grace did something nobody expected. She reached out her hand. Get up, she said quietly. Brandon stared at her hand like it might bite him. Get up, she repeated. Nobody should have to kneel. Slowly he took her hand. She pulled him to his feet. They stood facing each other. The billionaire's son and the waitress. The bully and his victim. Thank you, Brandon whispered. Grace nodded once. Then she turned and walked toward the kitchen. Head high, back straight, food still dripping down her face, but unbroken. Mad Dog watched her disappear. Then he turned back to Brandon. You got lucky today. That woman has more grace in her little finger than you've got in your whole body. She forgave you because that's who she is. His eyes hardened. We haven't forgiven you. Not yet. Brandon swallowed. What do you want from me? Mad Dog smiled. I want you to learn what respect means. He put a heavy hand on Brandon's shoulder. And you're going to learn it here, starting tomorrow morning, 6 a.m. sharp. Brandon's face twisted. You can't be serious. Do I look like I'm joking? Brandon looked at the 50 faces surrounding him. Hard faces, scarred faces, faces that had seen things he couldn't imagine. Not one of them was joking. 6 a.m., Brandon whispered. 6 a.m. Mad Dog confirmed. Don't be late. We don't give second chances. He released Brandon's shoulder. Now get out and leave a real tip this time. Brandon pulled out his wallet. His hands trembled as he dropped $500 bills on the nearest table. Then he walked out. His friends followed in silence. Engines started. Tires screeched. Expensive cars disappeared down the highway. The diner stayed quiet. Then Big Tommy raised his coffee cup. To Grace, he said. To Grace. 50 voices answered. And somewhere in the kitchen, behind a closed door, Grace Miller slid down the wall, buried her face in her hands, and finally let herself cry. But this wasn't the end, not even close, because tomorrow morning Brandon Hayes would walk back through that door, and everything would change. Brandon Hayes didn't sleep that night. He lay in his hotel suite staring at the ceiling. $5,000 a night, Egyptian cotton sheets, a view of the Vegas Strip that most people would kill for. None of it mattered. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face, Grace Miller, standing there with food dripping down her cheeks, tears in her eyes, but something else too. Something he couldn't name. She had offered him her hand. After everything he did, she had helped him up. His phone buzzed for the 100th time. His father's name flashed on the screen. He ignored it. Again. The video was everywhere now. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, every news outlet in the country. Billionaire's son humiliates waitress, Hell's Angels make him kneel. 30 million views and counting. His father had left 14 voicemails. Brandon hadn't listened to a single one. He already knew what they said. Disappointment, anger, threats, but for the first time in his life, his father's anger wasn't what scared him most. It was the look in Mad Dog Jensen's eyes when he'd said, 6 a.m., don't be late. Brandon glanced at the clock, 4:47 a.m. He had a choice. He could run, take his Ferrari drive to the airport, fly somewhere his father's lawyers could protect him, hide until this whole thing blew over. Or he could go back. His hands trembled as he reached for his phone. He pulled up the video, watched himself throw food at Grace, watched himself laugh. Who was that person? When had he become this? He threw the phone across the room. It hit the wall and clattered to the floor. Then Brandon Hayes did something he hadn't done since he was 12 years old. He cried. The sun was just starting to rise when Brandon pulled his Ferrari into the Golden Cup parking lot. 5:58 a.m. 50 motorcycles were already there, lined up in perfect formation, chrome gleaming in the early light. Brandon's stomach churned. He thought about turning around. His hand actually moved toward the gear shift. Then the diner door opened. Mad Dog Jensen stepped out, arms folded, face unreadable, watching, waiting. Brandon killed the engine, got out of the car. His legs felt like jelly as he walked toward the entrance. "You came," Mad Dog said. Not surprised, not impressed, just stating a fact. "You said 6. I said don't be late. You're 2 minutes early." The corner of Mad Dog's mouth twitched, almost a smile. Almost. "That's a start." He turned and walked inside. Brandon followed. The diner was already full. 50 bikers sat at the counter in booths nursing coffee, eating eggs. Every single one of them looked up when Brandon entered. Nobody said a word. The silence was worse than shouting. "Harold," Mad Dog called out, "I got your new employee." Harold Chen emerged from the kitchen. He looked at Brandon for a long moment. His face gave nothing away. "You ever work a day in your life, boy?" Brandon swallowed. "No, sir." "You know how to wash dishes?" "No, sir." "Know how to mop a floor?" "No, sir." "Know how to do anything useful at all?" Brandon's face burned. "No, sir." Harold nodded slowly. "Well, at least you're honest." He tossed something at Brandon, a bundle of fabric. Brandon caught it reflexively. "An apron." "Put it on," Harold said. "You start in the kitchen. Dishes are piling up. Water's hot. Soap's by the sink. Don't break anything." Brandon stared at the apron in his hands. Stained, worn, nothing like the designer clothes he was wearing. "Today, boy," Harold said, "we don't have all morning." Brandon put on the apron. It smelled like grease and soap and hard work, things he'd never known, things he'd spent his whole life avoiding. He walked into the kitchen. A mountain of dishes waited for him. Plates crusted with dried egg, cups stained with coffee, pans caked with grease. Brandon had never washed a dish in his life. His family had housekeepers for that. Cooks, servants. He rolled up his sleeves, turned on the water, and got to work. The first hour was hell. The water was scalding. The soap stung his hands. He broke 2 plates and burned himself 3 times. Grease got under his fingernails. His back ached from hunching over the sink, and the dishes kept coming. Every time he thought he was done, someone brought more. Plates piled with leftover pancakes, mugs drained of coffee, bowls scraped clean. "You missed a spot." Brandon spun around. Grace stood in the doorway, fresh apron, hair pulled back, no food on her face today, but she looked tired, so tired. "What?" Brandon managed. She pointed at the pan in his hands. "There's still grease on the bottom." He looked. She was right. "Sorry," he muttered. "I'll fix it." Grace didn't move, just watched him scrub the pan again. "Why did you come back?" she asked quietly. Brandon paused. Water ran over his reddened hands. "I don't know," he admitted. "You could have run. Rich kids usually run." "I thought about it." "What stopped you?" Brandon turned to face her, really looked at her for the first time. Not as a waitress, not as a target, as a person. "You helped me up," he said. "After what I did, you offered me your hand." He shook his head slowly. "Nobody's ever done that before." Grace studied his face, looking for something. Lies, maybe. Manipulation. "My mother taught me something," she finally said. "She said everyone deserves a second chance, even people who don't deserve it." "Your mother sounds smart." "She is." Grace's voice caught slightly. "She's the best person I know." Brandon remembered what Mad Dog had told him. Cancer, stage 3, Grace paying for everything. "I'm sorry," he said. "About your mom. I didn't know." Would it have mattered? The question hit him like a punch. Would it have mattered if he'd known about her mother? Would he have acted differently? Or would he have found some other excuse to humiliate her? "I don't know," he admitted. "Probably not. He searched for the right word. "I was a monster." Grace considered this. "At least you know it now," she said. "That's more than most people manage." She grabbed a tray of dirty dishes from the counter and set it by the sink. "Table 4 needs clearing. I'll be back with more." Then she was gone. Brandon stared at the new pile of dishes. He got back to work. By noon, Brandon's hands were raw. Blisters had formed on his palms. His shoulders screamed from the constant scrubbing. He'd sweated through his $1,000 shirt, but the mountain of dishes was finally under control. Break time. Big Tommy's massive frame filled the kitchen doorway. What? Break time. Tommy spoke slowly like he was talking to a child. 15 minutes. Kitchen's closed for lunch prep. Harold says you can eat. Brandon dried his hands on his apron, winced at the pain. I'm not hungry. Didn't ask if you were hungry. Harold made you a plate. You're gonna eat it. Tommy's eyes narrowed. And you're gonna thank him for it. Brandon followed Tommy into the main dining area. The lunch rush was starting. Every booth was full. Truckers and tourists and locals all eating and talking and laughing. Harold stood behind the counter. A plate sat in front of an empty stool. Cheeseburger, fries, a glass of water. Sit, Harold said. Brandon sat. Eat. Brandon picked up the burger, took a bite. It was the best thing he'd ever tasted. Not because it was fancy. It wasn't. It was just meat and cheese and bread and pickles. But he'd earned it. For the first time in his life, he'd actually earned his food. Good, Harold asked. Brandon nodded. Couldn't speak around the lump in his throat. My wife taught me that recipe, Harold said quietly. 40 years ago, she said the secret ingredient was love. I thought she was being corny. He smiled sadly. She wasn't. Brandon swallowed. I'm sorry about your wife. Harold shrugged. She's been gone 5 years now, cancer, same as Grace's mama. Brandon set down the burger. Is that why you hired Grace? Partly, mostly because she walked in here 3 years ago scared to death and still smiled at every customer like they were family. Harold's eyes met Brandon's. That girl has more strength in her little finger than most people have in their whole bodies. I know, Brandon whispered. I'm starting to understand that. Good. Harold picked up a rag, started wiping the counter. Because understanding is the first step, but it's not the last. What's the last step? Harold stopped wiping, looked at Brandon hard. Change, boy. Real change. Not just feeling bad. Not just saying sorry, actually becoming someone different. He leaned forward. The question is, are you willing to do what it takes? Before Brandon could answer, the door burst open. A woman stumbled in, middle-aged, expensive clothes, wild eyes. Brandon's blood went cold. Mom! Victoria Hayes spotted her son. Her face cycled through shock, relief, and fury in the space of 3 seconds. Brandon Richard Hayes. Her voice could have frozen lava. What the hell do you think you're doing? Brandon stood up slowly. Mom, I can explain. Explain. Victoria stormed toward him. I had to cancel a charity gala to fly here. Your father is losing his mind. The stock price dropped 8% because of that video. 8%. I'm sorry. You're sorry. Victoria grabbed his arm. We're leaving right now. I've already called the lawyers. We'll make this whole thing go away. No. The word came out before Brandon could stop it. Victoria froze. What did you say? I said no. Brandon pulled his arm free. I'm not leaving. Have you lost your mind? Look at yourself. She gestured at his stained apron, his raw hands, his sweaty face. You look like a servant. I look like someone who's working. You don't need to work. You're a Hayes. And what does that mean, Mom? Brandon's voice rose. What does being a Hayes actually mean? That I can treat people like garbage, that I never have to face consequences, that I can throw food at a woman and walk away because Daddy's lawyers will fix it. Keep your voice down. No, Brandon shouted. I'm done. I'm done being that person. I threw food at a woman whose mother is dying. I humiliated her because I could, because I thought money made me better than everyone else. His voice cracked. It doesn't. It doesn't make me better. It just made me blind. Victoria stared at her son like she'd never seen him before. Brandon, go home, Mom. Tell Dad I'll call him when I'm ready, but I'm not leaving. Not until I finish what I started. And what exactly did you start? I started learning how to be human. The diner had gone silent. Every eye was on them. Victoria looked around, at the bikers watching, at Harold behind the counter, at Grace standing frozen by the kitchen door. This is insane, Victoria whispered. Maybe. but it's the first sane thing I've done in 19 years. Victoria's jaw tightened. Brandon could see her calculating, weighing options, looking for leverage. But for once, she had none. Fine, she said finally. Stay, play servant, see if I care. She straightened her jacket. But when you come crawling back, and you will don't expect me to make this easy. She turned and walked out. The door slammed behind her. Brandon stood there breathing hard. Then someone started clapping. Slow, deliberate. Mad Dog Jensen rose from his booth. Well, well, he said. Maybe there's hope for you after all. Brandon didn't feel hopeful. He felt sick. He'd just told off his mother. In public. For the first time ever. But also, lighter. Like a weight he didn't know he'd been carrying had finally slipped off his shoulders. Break's over, Harold said gently. Kitchen needs you. Brandon nodded, walked back through the door. The dishes were waiting. He picked up the sponge and got back to work. The afternoon passed in a blur of soap and water and aching muscles. Brandon washed dishes until his hands went numb. Then he washed more. Around 3 o'clock, Mad Dog appeared in the kitchen doorway. Come with me. Brandon dried his hands, followed Mad Dog outside. 50 motorcycles gleamed in the afternoon sun. 50 bikers stood beside them. You know why we made you come back? Mad Dog asked. To punish me. Wrong. Mad Dog turned to face him. Punishment is easy. Revenge is easy. Any fool can hurt someone who hurt them. He paused. We brought you back to give you a chance. A chance for what? To see. See what? Mad Dog pointed at the diner. That woman in there, Grace, she makes $300 a week, works 70 hours, hasn't taken a vacation in 3 years. Every penny she earns goes to her mother's treatment. Brandon's stomach twisted. The man behind the counter, Harold, lost his wife to cancer, almost lost the diner twice, still shows up every day at 4 a.m., still makes every patty by hand, still treats every customer like family. Mad Dog stepped closer. These people you look down on, they're warriors. They fight battles every single day that you couldn't even imagine. They don't have trust funds to fall back on. They don't have lawyers to fix their mistakes. They just have themselves. His voice hardened. And you threw food at one of them, like she was nothing. Brandon felt tears burning his eyes. I know, you were a coward, a bully, a spoiled little boy who never learned that money doesn't make you a man. Mad Dog grabbed Brandon's shoulder, not hard, just firm. But that's not who you have to be. That's what we're trying to show you. Why? Brandon's voice cracked. Why do you even care I'm nothing to you? Because someone did it for me. Brandon blinked. What? Mad Dog was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was different, softer. I was you once. Different details, same story. Rich family, fancy schools. Thought I was better than everyone. He shook his head slowly. Then I hurt someone. Bad. Someone who didn't deserve it. What happened? An old biker found me. Mean-looking son of a gun. Scared me half to death, but instead of beating me senseless, which I deserved, he made me work. Made me see. Made me understand that being a man isn't about what you have. It's about how you treat people. Mad Dog released Brandon's shoulder. That old biker saved my life. Gave me a family when my real family wanted nothing to do with me. Gave me purpose when I had none. He gestured at the men around him. These boys, they're my brothers. Not because we share blood, because we share something more important. What? Respect, loyalty, the understanding that every person matters. Mad Dog's eyes locked onto Brandon's. That's what we're offering you, kid. Not punishment, a path. Brandon looked at the bikers. Razor with his scars, Big Tommy with his massive arms, Preacher with his quiet eyes. They weren't looking at him with hatred anymore. They were looking at him with something else, possibility. I don't deserve this, Brandon whispered. No. Mad Dog agreed. You don't. But grace isn't about deserving. It's about receiving, anyway. He smiled slightly. Funny coincidence, right, Grace? Brandon almost laughed. Almost. What do I do now? Go back inside. Keep washing dishes. Keep watching. Keep learning. Mad Dog clapped him on the back. Tomorrow we start the real work. What's the real work? You'll see. Mad Dog headed toward his motorcycle. 6 a.m. Don't be late. Brandon walked back into the diner. Grace was waiting. I saw you talking to Mad Dog, she said. What did he say? That I don't deserve this chance. He's right, you don't. He also said that's not the point. Grace nodded slowly. It's not. She handed him a fresh apron. His old one was soaked through. Your hands are bleeding, she said, looking at his blistered palms. I know. There's bandages in the first aid kit, under the counter. I'm fine. You're not fine. You're hurt. Grace's voice softened. Just because you're trying to change doesn't mean you have to destroy yourself. She walked to the counter, came back with bandages and antiseptic. Sit down. Brandon sat. Grace took his hands in hers, gently, so gently. She cleaned the blisters, applied ointment, wrapped them in bandages. Her hands were rough, calloused from 3 years of hard work, but her touch was tender. Why are you helping me? Brandon asked. Because you're hurt. That's not a reason. Not after what I did. Grace finished bandaging his right hand, started on his left. My mother got sick 3 years ago, she said quietly. Right before her diagnosis, she sat me down, told me something I'll never forget. What? She said, Gracie, the world is going to try to make you hard. Don't let it. Being soft isn't weakness, it's strength. It takes courage to be kind when everyone around you is cruel. Grace finished the last bandage. I hated you yesterday. I won't lie. When you threw that food in my face, I wanted to hurt you. I wanted to scream and cry and make you feel as small as you made me feel. You should have. Maybe. Grace looked up at him. But that's not who I want to be. I watched you on your knees today, washing dishes until your hands bled, telling your mother no. She paused. That's not who you were yesterday. Something's changing in you. I can see it. It doesn't erase what I did. No, it doesn't. Nothing can erase it. Grace stood up. But you can build something new, something better, if you really want to. I want to, Brandon said. I don't know how, but I want to. Grace almost smiled, almost. That's a start. She walked back toward the kitchen. Brandon looked down at his bandaged hands. For 19 years, these hands had never done anything useful, never created anything, never helped anyone. Today they'd wash dishes until they bled. Tomorrow he would do it again. And somehow, for the first time in his life, Brandon Hayes felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The door opened. A young woman walked in, early 20s, blonde hair, designer clothes. Brandon's heart stopped. It was Brittany, one of his friends from yesterday. She spotted him immediately. Her eyes went wide. Brandon, oh my God, you're actually here. Brittany, what are you? I came to see if it was true, the video, everyone's talking about it. She walked toward him slowly. Your mom called my mom, said you were having some kind of breakdown. I'm not having a breakdown. Then what do you call this? Brittany gestured at his apron. His bandaged hands. You're washing dishes, Brandon. Dishes. I know what I'm doing. Do you? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've completely lost it. She lowered her voice. Come on, let's get out of here. We'll go back to Vegas. Party it off. By next week, everyone will have forgotten. No. Brittany blinked. No, I'm not going back. Not yet. Not until I'm done here. Done with what? Playing port bomb. Brittany laughed. This is ridiculous. You're Brandon Hayes. You don't need to prove anything to these people. Brandon looked around the diner, at Harold behind the counter, at the bikers in their booths, at Grace watching from the kitchen doorway. You're wrong, he said. I do need to prove something, just not to them. Then to who? To myself. Brittany stared at him. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then she shook her head. You've changed, she said, not admiringly, confused. I don't know who you are anymore. Neither do I, Brandon admitted, but I'm trying to find out. Brittany looked at Grace, then back at Brandon. Is this about her, the waitress? It's about me and what I want to become. Brittany's jaw tightened. Fine, ruin your life. See if I care. She turned and stormed out. Brandon watched her go. He didn't feel sad. He didn't feel relieved. He just felt clear. Friend of yours, Mad Dog, had appeared beside him. She used to be. Not anymore. I don't know. Brandon shook his head. Maybe we were never really friends. Maybe we just used each other. Mad Dog grunted. That's how it works in your world, isn't it? Everyone using everyone. Yeah, I guess it is. Well, Mad Dog clapped him on the shoulder. Welcome to a different world, kid. One where people actually give a damn about each other. He walked away. Brandon stood there for a long moment. Then he went back to the kitchen. The dishes were waiting. 9:00 p.m., the diner was finally closing. Brandon hung up his apron. His whole body ached. His hands throbbed despite the bandages. His back felt like it had been beaten with a baseball bat. But he'd made it, one day down. Harold locked the front door. Grace finished wiping down the last table. Same time tomorrow, Brandon asked. Harold looked at him, really looked. You sure you want to come back? Today was easy. Tomorrow will be harder. I'm sure. Why? Brandon thought about the question, about everything that had happened, about the person he'd been and the person he wanted to become. Because I need to, he said simply. Harold nodded slowly. 6 a.m., don't be late. Brandon walked out to his Ferrari. The parking lot was empty now. The motorcycles had gone. He sat behind the wheel for a long time. His phone buzzed, a text from his father. We need to talk, tonight. Brandon stared at the message. Then he typed back, tomorrow, I'll call you tomorrow. He started the engine. As he pulled out of the parking lot, he took one last look at the golden cup in his rearview mirror. The sign flickered. The G in golden still wasn't working, but somehow it was the most beautiful place he'd ever seen. Brandon drove into the night. Tomorrow would be harder. He was counting on it. Day 2 started at 5:47 a.m. Brandon pulled into the parking lot 13 minutes early. His body screamed at him to turn around. His hands still throbbed. His back felt like someone had taken a hammer to it, but he got out of the car anyway. Mad Dog was waiting by the door. Couldn't sleep, the old biker asked. Not much. Good. Sleep is for people who don't have work to do. Mad Dog pushed open the door. Today, you're on tables. Brandon stopped. Tables. You heard me. Dishes were just the warm-up. Now you serve. I don't know how to. Then you'll learn. Mad Dog handed him a notepad and pen. Grace will show you the ropes. Try not to embarrass yourself. Brandon found Grace in the kitchen tying her apron. I heard, she said before he could speak. Tables, you ready? No. Honest answer. She almost smiled. Come on, I'll teach you. For the next hour, Grace walked Brandon through everything. How to greet customers, how to take orders without making mistakes, how to carry plates without dropping them, how to refill coffee without spilling, how to smile even when your feet hurt and your back ached and you wanted nothing more than to sit down. The trick, Grace said, is to make them feel like they're the only person in the room, even when you've got 10 other tables waiting. How do you do that? Practice and caring. She looked at him. You have to actually care about people, Brandon. Not pretend. Actually care. What if I don't know how? Then learn. The breakfast rush hit at 7 a.m. Brandon's first customer was a truck driver named Earl. Big guy, tattooed arms, looked like he could bench press a car. Morning, Brandon said, his voice shaking slightly. Welcome to the Golden Cup. Can I get you started with some coffee? Earl looked up from his menu. His eyes narrowed. You're that rich kid from the video. Brandon's stomach dropped. Yes, sir. The one who threw food at the waitress. Yes, sir. Earl stared at him for a long moment. Brandon braced himself for anger. Insults. Maybe a fist. Instead, Earl laughed. Well, I'll be damned. They actually put you to work. He shook his head. All right, rich boy, let's see what you've got. I'll take the eggs, scrambled, bacon crispy, toast well done, and keep that coffee coming. Yes, sir, coming right up. Brandon walked to the kitchen on shaky legs, handed the order to Harold. First one's always the hardest, Harold said. You did fine. He recognized me. Everyone's going to recognize you. That video's got 50 million views now. Harold cracked eggs onto the griddle. Question is, what are they going to see when they look at you, the boy who threw food or the man who's trying to do better? Brandon didn't have an answer. He went back to work. By 10 a.m., Brandon had served 14 tables. He'd messed up 3 orders, spilled coffee twice, dropped a plate of pancakes on the floor. Each time Grace appeared beside him, helping him clean up, showing him what he'd done wrong, never judging, never mocking. "You're getting better," she said after his 4th successful delivery. "I'm terrible." "You're learning. There's a difference." She wiped down an empty table. "When I started, I cried every night for a week. Couldn't remember orders. Couldn't carry trays. Thought I'd never get it. What changed? I stopped trying to be perfect and started trying to be present." She looked at him. "You spend so much energy being scared of failure that you forget to pay attention to what's actually happening." Brandon thought about that. "How do I stop being scared?" "You don't. Fear doesn't go away. You just learn to work with it instead of against it." The lunch rush was worse. Twice as many customers, twice as many orders, twice as many chances to fail. Brandon moved table to table like a man possessed. Sweat dripped down his face. His hands cramped from writing. His feet screamed with every step. But he kept going. Around 1 p.m., a family walked in. Mother, father, 2 kids. The little girl couldn't have been more than 6. Brandon approached their table. "Welcome to the Golden Cup. Can I?" The mother's face went pale. "Oh my God. Marcus, that's him. From the video." The father looked up. His expression hardened. "We should go somewhere else," the mother whispered. "No," the father said. "Kids need to eat. We're staying." Brandon swallowed. "I understand if you want someone else to serve you." "Sit down, Amanda," the father said to his wife. Then he looked at Brandon. "You remember what you did to that girl?" "Every second, sir." "Good. Don't ever forget it." The father picked up his menu. "Now take our order and do it right." Brandon's hands trembled as he wrote, "Chicken nuggets for the kids, salad for the mother, burger for the father." When he delivered the food, the little girl tugged on his apron. "Mister, why is everyone looking at you funny?" Brandon knelt down to her level. "Because I did something very bad, and now I'm trying to make it right." "Did you say sorry?" "I did." "Then why are people still mad?" Brandon looked at the little girl's innocent face. Her simple question hit harder than any insult. "Because sometimes sorry isn't enough, sweetheart. Sometimes you have to show people you have changed, with your actions, not just your words." The little girl nodded seriously. "Mommy says actions speak louder than words." "Your mommy is very smart." He stood up. The father was watching him. "That was a good answer," the father said quietly. "It's the truth." Brandon walked away. Behind him, he heard the mother whisper, "Maybe people can change after all." Day 3, day 4, day 5. Each morning, Brandon arrived before dawn. Each night, he left after dark. He learned to take orders without mistakes. He learned to carry 4 plates at once. He learned to smile at customers who cursed at him and thank customers who tipped him nothing. He learned what it meant to be tired, really tired. Not the fake tiredness of staying up too late at parties. The bone-deep exhaustion of honest work. And slowly something began to shift. The regulars started nodding at him instead of glaring. The bikers stopped watching his every move. Harold started calling him son instead of boy. But it was Grace who noticed the biggest change. "You're different," she said on the 5th night after the diner had closed. Brandon looked up from mopping the floor. "Different how? Quieter, more present." She tilted her head, "Like you're actually here instead of waiting to be somewhere else." "I am here." "I know, that's what's different." She sat down at the counter. Brandon set aside the mop and sat beside her. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Depends." "Your mother, how is she really?" Grace was quiet for a long moment. "She's fighting," she finally said. "The chemo is working, but it's hard. Some days she can't get out of bed. Some days she can't keep food down." Her voice cracked. "Some days I go home and she's just lying there so still, and I have to watch her chest to make sure she's still breathing." Brandon felt his heart break. "I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry, be better." Grace looked at him. "That's all any of us can do." "How much longer does she have with the treatment?" "Doctors say if she finishes all the rounds, she has a good chance. 70% survival rate." Grace's jaw tightened. "But each round costs more than I make in a month. Insurance covers some of it. Not enough." "How much do you still owe, Brandon?" How much? Grace hesitated. $42,000. Brandon felt sick. He spent more than that on a weekend in Vegas, on kisses, on watches, on nothing. I can help. No. Grace, I said no. Her voice was firm. I don't want your money. I don't want anyone's charity. I want to earn it. I want to know that when my mother gets better, it's because I fought for it, not because some rich kid felt guilty. Brandon wanted to argue, wanted to write a check right there and make the problem disappear. But he understood. This wasn't about money. It was about dignity. The same dignity he tried to strip from her 5 days ago. Okay, he said quietly. I understand. Grace studied his face, looking for something. She must have found it because her expression softened. Thank you, she whispered, for understanding. They sat in silence for a while. Then Grace stood up. I need to go home. Check on my mom. Can I meet her sometime? Your mother? Grace looked surprised. Why, because she raised you and you're the strongest person I've ever met. I want to meet the woman who made you. For the first time since they'd met, Grace truly smiled. Maybe, someday, if you keep showing up. I will. We'll see. She grabbed her jacket and walked out. Brandon sat alone in the empty diner. Then he picked up the mop and finished cleaning. Day 6, Brandon was taking an order when his phone buzzed. He ignored it. Phones weren't allowed during shifts, one of Harold's rules. But it kept buzzing again and again and again. During his break, he checked it. 17 missed calls from his father, 12 from his mother, 23 text messages, and 1 voicemail that made his blood run cold. Brandon, this is your father. I've been patient. I've given you your little adventure, but it ends now. I'm flying to Nevada tonight. We're going to have a conversation. And then you're coming home. This isn't a request. Brandon stared at the phone. Richard Hayes was coming. The man who had built an empire through ruthlessness and cunning. The man who had never lost a negotiation in his life. The man who had raised Brandon to believe that weakness was sin and mercy was foolishness. His father was coming, and he wouldn't take no for an answer. Brandon found Mad Dog outside working on his motorcycle. We have a problem. Mad Dog didn't look up. Your daddy's coming. How did you? I have friends everywhere, kid. Private jets don't land in Nevada without me knowing about it. Mad Dog wiped grease from his hands. He'll be here by morning. What do I do? Now Mad Dog looked up. His eyes were serious. What do you want to do? I want to stay. I want to finish this. Then stay. Finish it. You don't understand. My father, he doesn't hear. No, he doesn't accept failure. He'll make my life hell. So, Brandon blinked. So he could cut me off, take everything, leave me with nothing. Mad Dog stood up slowly, all 6'4" of him. Let me tell you something about nothing, kid. I've had nothing, real nothing, slept in ditches, begged for food, watched friends die because they couldn't afford a doctor. He stepped closer. And you know what I learned, nothing is freedom. When you have nothing to lose, nobody can control you. I'm not like you. I'm not strong enough. Bull. Mad Dog grabbed Brandon's shoulder. Strength isn't something you have. It's something you choose every day, every moment. You choose to be strong or you choose to be weak. His grip tightened. So choose. Brandon looked at the old biker, at the scars and tattoos and years of hard living etched into his face. I choose to stay, he said. Good. Mad Dog released him. Then let's get you ready for the fight of your life. Richard Hayes arrived at 9 a.m. the next morning. A black limousine pulled into the Golden Cup parking lot. It looked absurd next to the dusty pickup trucks and battered motorcycles. The door opened. Richard Hayes stepped out. 62 years old, silver hair, tailored suit that cost more than most people's houses, eyes like chips of ice. He looked at the diner with unconcealed disgust. Then he walked inside. Brandon was serving coffee to a table of truckers when his father entered. He felt the temperature in the room drop. Brandon, one word, enough to freeze his blood. Brandon set down the coffee pot, turned to face his father. Hello, Dad. Richard's eyes swept over his son, the apron, the worn clothes, the calloused hands. What have you done to yourself? I've been working. Working. Richard spat the word like it was his poison. You're a haze. Hazes don't work. We own, we command, we rule. Maybe that's the problem. Silence. Richard's jaw tightened. We're leaving, now. No, I wasn't asking. Neither was I. Father and son stared at each other. The diner had gone completely quiet. Then Richard laughed, cold, mirthless. You think you found yourself, is that it? You think washing dishes and serving coffee makes you a better person? I think it's a start. It's pathetic. You're embarrassing yourself. You're embarrassing the family. You're embarrassing me. Good. Richard's eyes widened. What did you say? I said good. Brandon's voice grew stronger. For 19 years, all I've done is try to make you proud. Try to be what you wanted me to be. Cold, ruthless, better than everyone else. He shook his head. I'm done. I'm done being your trophy. I'm done being your heir. I'm done being the monster you created. Monster, I made you a king. You made me empty, Brandon shouted. You made me so empty that the only way I could feel anything was by tearing other people down. I threw food at a woman, a good, kind, hard-working woman, because I had nothing inside me but cruelty and emptiness. Lower your voice. No, you're going to hear this, Dad. For once in your life, you're going to listen to your son. Richard's face went red. I don't have to listen to anything. Then leave. Walk out that door and never come back, because I'm not going with you. Not today, not ever. The words hung in the air like thunder. Richard stood perfectly still. His hands were shaking. Whether from rage or something else, Brandon couldn't tell. If you stay here, Richard said slowly, you're cut off. No money, no inheritance, no safety net, nothing. And then I'll have nothing. You'll be nobody. Good. Then I can finally figure out who I actually am. Richard stared at his son for a long, terrible moment. Then something shifted in his eyes. Something Brandon had never seen before. Pain. Real pain. You sound like your grandfather, Richard whispered. Brandon froze. What? Your grandfather, my father, he used to say the same things to me. Richard's voice cracked almost imperceptibly. Before I drove him away. The confession hung in the air. Brandon had never met his grandfather. Never knew why. His father had always refused to talk about it. What happened? Brandon asked. What happened between you and Grandpa? Richard was quiet for a long moment. He was a good man, a simple man, worked construction his whole life, gave me everything he had so I could go to college, build something better. Richard's jaw tightened. And when I made my first $1 million, I looked at him, at his calloused hands and worn clothes, and I was ashamed. Ashamed of where I came from. So I pushed him away, told him I didn't need him anymore. Dad, he died alone, Brandon, in a nursing home I paid for but never visited. I didn't even go to his funeral. Richard's voice broke, and I've spent 40 years trying to fill that hole with money and power and success. It never worked. It never will. Brandon didn't know what to say. For the first time in his life, he was seeing his father. Not the titan, not the billionaire, just a broken man who had made terrible choices and had to live with them. Why are you telling me this? Brandon asked. Richard looked at him, really looked at him, like he was seeing his son for the first time. Because I don't want you to make my mistakes. I don't want you to end up like me, rich and powerful and completely alone. Then let me stay. Let me finish what I started. Richard closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were wet. 1 week, he said quietly. You have 1 week to finish this. Then we talk. Really talk. Like a father and son should have talked a long time ago. Brandon felt his throat tighten. Okay, 1 week. Richard nodded once. Then he did something he hadn't done since Brandon was 5 years old. He hugged his son. It was awkward, stiff. Neither of them knew quite how to do it, but it was real. I'm sorry, Richard whispered, for everything. I know, Dad, I know. Richard pulled back, straightened his suit, became the billionaire again. But something had changed. Brandon could see it in his eyes. 1 week, Richard repeated, and walked out. The limousine pulled away. Brandon stood in the middle of the diner, surrounded by strangers who had witnessed the most important conversation of his life. Then someone started clapping. It was Grace. She walked toward him, tears streaming down her face. That was the bravest thing I've ever seen, she said. I was terrified. That's what makes it brave. She took his hand, squeezed it. Come on, she said. We've got customers waiting. Brandon looked at their intertwined fingers, at her calloused hand holding his. Grace. Yeah. After my week is done, can I still come back? She smiled. We'll see. They walked back to work together, and for the first time in his life, Brandon Hayes knew exactly where he belonged. The days after Richard Hayes left were different. Brandon worked harder than ever, not because he had to, because he wanted to. Something had cracked open inside him during that confrontation with his father, and now he couldn't close it again. He arrived at 5:30 every morning, left at 10 every night, washed dishes, served tables, mopped floors, did whatever Harold asked without complaint. But it was the quiet moments that changed him most. The conversations with truckers who had driven through the night and just needed someone to listen. The smiles from children who didn't care about his last name or his bank account. The nods from the bikers who had gone from watching him with suspicion to treating him like one of their own. And Grace, always Grace. She didn't say much about what had happened with his father. Didn't ask questions, didn't push, but something had shifted between them. A wall had come down. On the 8th morning, she found him in the kitchen before dawn prepping vegetables for the lunch rush. You're early, she said. Couldn't sleep. Nightmares. Opposite, actually. Brandon looked up from the cutting board. I slept better than I have in years. Woke up at 4 and just lay there feeling peaceful. It was weird. Grace smiled slightly. That's not weird. That's what happens when you stop running from yourself. Is that what I was doing? Running. Weren't you? Brandon thought about it. About the parties that never satisfied him. The cars that never made him happy. The friends who were never really friends at all. Yeah, he admitted. I guess I was. Grace grabbed an apron from the hook, started tying it. My mother wants to meet you. Brandon's knife stopped mid-chop. What? She's been following the story, the video, the news coverage. She called me last night and said, I want to meet this boy, the one who's learning to be human. Grace's voice softened. She doesn't usually ask for things. She's too proud, but she asked for this. Brandon set down the knife. His heart was pounding. When tonight, after your shift, if you want. I want. The words came out before he could stop them. I mean, yes, I'd be honored. Grace nodded. Don't bring flowers. She hates flowers. Says they just remind her that everything dies. What should I bring? Just yourself. That's all she wants to see. She turned and walked into the main dining area. Brandon picked up the knife again. His hands were shaking. The day passed in a blur of orders and coffee refills and the constant dance of a busy diner. But Brandon couldn't focus. Couldn't stop thinking about tonight. About meeting the woman who had raised Grace. About what she would see when she looked at him. Would she see the boy from the video, the monster who had humiliated her daughter? Or would she see something else? At 7:30, Grace touched his arm. Ready? No. Good. That means you care. She grabbed her jacket. Come on, she's waiting. Grace drove them in her old Honda Civic. The engine rattled. The heater barely worked. But she handled it like she handled everything with quiet competence and zero complaints. How long has she been sick? Brandon asked. 3 years. Started as a lump she ignored for too long. By the time she finally saw a doctor, it had spread. Grace's hands tightened on the wheel. She almost died twice in the first year. Twice I sat in hospital waiting rooms thinking I was going to lose her. But she made it. She's a fighter. Always has been. Grace smiled sadly. When my dad left, she worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat. Never complained, never asked for help. Just kept going. Like you. Grace glanced at him. I learned from the best. They pulled into a mobile home park on the outskirts of town. Grace parked in front of a small trailer with a neat garden out front. Flowers, despite what Grace had said about her mother hating them. She planted those, Grace said, reading in his thoughts. She says flowers remind her of death, but she can't help loving them anyway. That's just who she is, full of contradictions. They walked to the door. Grace paused before opening it. Brandon. Yeah. She's going to say things that make you uncomfortable. That's just how she is. She says what she thinks, always has. Grace looked at him. Don't take it personally. And don't lie to her. She can smell lies from a mile away. Okay, one more thing. Thank you for coming, for being willing to do this. Grace's voice cracked slightly. It means more than you know. Before Brandon could respond, she pushed open the door. The trailer was small but immaculate. Every surface clean, every item in its place. And sitting in an armchair by the window was a woman who looked like an older, frailer version of Grace. Margaret Miller. Her hair was thin and gray. Her face was pale and drawn. But her eyes were sharp as knives. So, she said, her voice stronger than Brandon expected, "You're the boy who threw food at my daughter." Brandon swallowed. "Yes, ma'am." "Come here. Let me look at you." Brandon walked forward on unsteady legs, stood in front of her chair like a defendant before a judge. Margaret studied him. Her eyes moved over his face, his hands, his posture, reading him like a book. "You're scared," she finally said. "Terrified." "Good, you should be." She leaned forward slightly. "Do you know what I wanted to do when I saw that video? When I watched you throw food in my little girl's face?" "No, ma'am. I wanted to kill you." The words were calm, matter of fact. "I wanted to come to that diner with my late husband's shotgun and shoot you dead. I wanted to watch the life drain out of your eyes while you beg for mercy." Brandon couldn't breathe. "Mom," Grace said quietly. "Hush, I'm not finished." Margaret's eyes never left Brandon's face. "That's what I wanted, but I didn't do it. You know why?" "No, ma'am." "Because my daughter asked me not to. She called me that night crying, my strong, beautiful girl who never cries, and she told me what happened. All of it, including the part where she helped you up, where she showed you grace." Margaret's voice softened infinitesimally. She said, "Mama, I think he can change. I think there's something good in him trying to get out." So I put down the shotgun, and I waited. Brandon felt tears burning his eyes. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for what I did." "I know you are. I can see it." Margaret reached out and took his hand. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "Sit down, boy. Let's talk." Brandon sat on the small couch across from her. Grace sat beside him. "Tell me about your father," Margaret said. "My father," Grace told me what happened. The confrontation at the diner. Your father flying out to drag you home. Margaret's eyes searched his face. "Tell me about him. Not the billionaire. The man." Brandon was quiet for a long moment. He's broken," he finally said. "I didn't see it until last week. I thought he was invincible. This tower of strength and power that nothing could touch. But he's just broken and lonely and so scared of being weak that he's made himself into a monster. Like you were." "Yeah, like I was." "And what changed you? What cracked you open?" Brandon looked at Grace. She met his eyes. "Your daughter," he said. "She helped me up when I was on my knees. After everything I did, she offered me her hand. Nobody's ever done anything like that for me. Nobody's ever shown me that kind of..." He struggled for the word. "Grace," Margaret finished. "Yeah, Grace." Margaret nodded slowly. "My daughter has always been like that, even as a child. She'd find injured birds and nurse them back to health, bring home stray cats, befriend the kids at school that everyone else ignored." Her voice caught. She got it from her father. He was the same way, gentle, kind, too kind for this world. "What happened to him?" Brandon asked. "He left when Grace was 12. Just woke up one morning, packed a bag, and drove away. No explanation. No goodbye." Margaret's jaw tightened. "We found out later he'd been living a double life, another family in another state. He chose them over us." Brandon glanced at Grace. Her face was stone. "I'm sorry," he said. "Don't be. It taught Grace something important. It taught her that people can be wonderful and terrible at the same time, that love and betrayal can live in the same heart." Margaret squeezed his hand. "You remind me of him, you know." Brandon flinched. "I do. Not the bad parts, the lost parts, the parts that were trying to be good but didn't know how." Margaret's eyes glistened. "My husband wasn't evil. He was weak. He made choices he couldn't take back, and instead of facing them, he ran. You could have run too. You didn't. I wanted to. Every day I want to. But you stayed. Yeah, that's the difference, boom. That's what separates the men from the cowards. Margaret released his hand and leaned back in her chair. Now, tell me what you're going to do with the rest of your life. The question hit Brandon like a punch. I don't know, he admitted. I've never had to think about it before. My future was always decided for me. Take over my father's company, marry someone from another rich family, have kids who would be just as empty as I was. And now I just want to be useful, to matter, to look at myself in the mirror and not hate what I see. He shook his head. I know that sounds stupid. It sounds like you're finally growing up. Margaret smiled, the first real smile he'd seen from her. That's not stupid. That's the most important thing a person can do. They talked 4 hours. Margaret told stories about Grace as a child, about her late husband, about her own mother who had survived the Great Depression and taught her that hard work was the only currency that never lost its value. Brandon talked about his grandfather, the construction worker, who had died alone while his son built an empire, the guilt that his father carried like a stone around his neck. Grace mostly listened, but sometimes Brandon caught her watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Around 11, Margaret's eyes started to droop. I'm tired, she admitted. The chemo takes a lot out of me. We should go, Grace said, standing. Wait. Margaret reached for Brandon's hand again. Come closer. He leaned in. You hurt my daughter, Margaret whispered. You can never undo that. But you can choose what happens next. You can be the person who threw food at a waitress, or you can be the person who learned from it. That choice is yours, every single day. Don't ever forget it. I won't, ma'am. And one more thing. Yes, Margaret's eyes flickered to Grace, then back to Brandon. My daughter doesn't let people in. She learned that from her father leaving. She protects herself by keeping everyone at arm's length, but she let you in. Margaret's grip tightened. If you hurt her again in any way, I won't need a shotgun. I'll destroy you with my bare hands, cancer or no cancer. Do you understand? Yes, ma'am, I understand. Good. She released his hand, smiled sweetly. Now give me a hug and get out of here. I need my beauty sleep. Brandon hugged her gently. She felt fragile in his arms, breakable but also somehow stronger than anyone he'd ever met. Thank you, he whispered, for giving me a chance. Thank Grace, she's the one who believed in you. They said their goodbyes. Grace tucked a blanket around her mother and kissed her forehead. Then they walked out into the night. They drove in silence for a while. The Nevada desert stretched endlessly around them, stars scattered across the sky like spilled diamonds. Your mother is incredible, Brandon finally said. I know. She threatened to kill me with her bare hands. She meant it? Brandon laughed. The sound surprised him, real laughter, from somewhere deep inside. I believe you. Grace pulled off the road suddenly, parked the car, killed the engine. What are you doing? Brandon asked. I need to tell you something. Okay. Grace stared straight ahead. Her hands gripped the steering wheel. When I was 12 after my father left, I stopped believing in people. I stopped believing that anyone could be trusted, that anyone could change, that anyone could be good. Her voice trembled. For 12 years, I've lived that way, keeping everyone at a distance, never letting anyone in. Grace, let me finish. She took a breath. When you threw that food at me, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Rage. Pure burning rage. I wanted to destroy you. I wanted to watch you suffer. I deserved it. Maybe, but that's not the point. She finally turned to look at him. Tears streamed down her face. The point is that over the past week, I've watched you change. Really change. Not the fake change that people do to avoid consequences. The real kind, the hard kind. Brandon didn't know what to say. And it scares me, Grace continued, because I'm starting to believe again, starting to think that maybe people can change. Maybe not everyone is going to leave. Maybe not everyone is going to hurt me. She wiped her eyes. You did that. You made me feel something I thought was dead. Grace, I'm not finished. She took his hand. I don't know what happens after your week is done. I don't know if you're going to go back to your life or stay here or something else entirely. But I need you to know something. What? No matter what happens, you have already given me something important. You've given me hope, and I haven't had that in a very long time. Brandon felt tears on his own cheeks. I'm not going anywhere, he said. I don't care about my father's money. I don't care about the company. I don't care about any of it. He squeezed her hand. I care about this. About you. About being someone worth believing in. Grace was quiet for a long moment. Then she leaned over and kissed him. It was soft and gentle, tasting of salt from both their tears. When she pulled back, her eyes were bright. Don't make me regret that, she whispered. I won't. I swear I won't. They sat there in the darkness, holding hands, watching the stars. And for the first time in either of their lives, the future didn't feel like a weight. It felt like a promise. The next morning started like any other. Brandon arrived at 5:30, put on his apron, started prepping for the breakfast rush. But something was different. He could feel it in the air. Something wrong. Grace hadn't arrived yet. She was never late. By 6, he was worried. By 6:15, he was pacing. Something's wrong, he told Harold. Grace is never late. Harold's face was serious. I know. I've been trying to call her. And no answer. Brandon's blood went cold. At 6:20, his phone rang. Grace's number. He answered immediately. Grace, where are Brandon? Her voice was barely a whisper. Broken, shattered. It's my mom. She collapsed. She's not breathing right. I'm in the ambulance. I don't know what to do. I don't know. Which hospital? St. Mary's downtown. Brandon, I'm so scared. I can't lose her. I can't. I'm coming right now. Don't hang up. I can't. They're saying I have to go. The line went dead. Brandon was out the door before his brain caught up with his legs. He drove like a maniac, ran 3 red lights, nearly sideswiped a truck. Didn't care. All he could think about was Grace. Alone, terrified. Watching her mother slip away. He couldn't let her face this by herself. He wouldn't. St. Mary's Hospital was chaos. Brandon burst through the emergency room doors, scanned the waiting area, and there she was. Grace sat in a plastic chair in the corner. Her face was pale, her hands were shaking. She looked like a child lost in a storm. Brandon ran to her. Grace, she looked up. Her eyes were empty, hollow. They took her back, she whispered. They said her lungs filled with fluid. They said she might not. She couldn't finish the sentence. Brandon dropped to his knees in front of her, took her hands in his. Look at me. She didn't move. Grace, look at me. Slowly, her eyes focused on his face. Your mother is the strongest person I've ever met. Stronger than me. Stronger than my father. Stronger than anyone. He squeezed her hands. She's not going to give up, and neither are you, and neither am I. You don't know that. You can't promise. I can promise that I'm not leaving. Not now, not ever. Brandon's voice broke. You showed me what it means to be human. Now let me show you what it means to not be alone. Grace stared at him. Then she collapsed into his arms. She cried. Huge, racking sobs that shook her entire body. All the fear she'd been holding in, all the strength she'd been faking. It all came pouring out. Brandon held her. He didn't try to fix it, didn't try to make it better with words, just held her while she fell apart. Sometimes that's all you can do. Sometimes that's everything. Hours passed. Doctors came and went. Nurses checked clipboards. Machines beeped somewhere in the distance. Grace and Brandon sat together, hands intertwined, waiting. At some point, the Hells Angels arrived, all 50 of them. They filled the waiting room like an army of leather and chrome. Mad Dog sat down next to Brandon. How's she doing? We don't know yet. And Grace, hanging on. Mad Dog nodded slowly. We're not going anywhere, whatever she needs, whatever you need. Brandon looked at the old biker, at the man who had forced him to his knees a week ago, who had demanded he learn respect the hard way. Thank you, Brandon whispered, for everything. Don't thank me yet, kid. Night's not over. At 2 a.m., a doctor emerged. Grace jumped to her feet. Brandon rose beside her. Miss Miller. Yes, how is she? Is she? Your mother is stable. Grace's knees buckled. Brandon caught her. Stable? The fluid in her lungs was caused by an infection. We've drained it and started her on antibiotics. It was touch and go for a while, but she's responding well to treatment. The doctor smiled gently. She's asking for you. Can I see her, Mama? Of course, follow me. Grace turned to Brandon, tears streaming down her face, but this time they were different tears. Relief, joy, gratitude. Come with me, she said. Are you sure this should be private? Please, I want you there. She'll want you there. They followed the doctor through endless hallways until they reached a small room. Margaret Miller lay in the hospital bed, tubes and wires everywhere, but her eyes were open, and when she saw Grace, she smiled. There's my girl. Grace rushed to her side, grabbed her hand. Mama, I was so scared. I thought, hush, I'm not going anywhere, not yet. Margaret's eyes moved to Brandon, standing awkwardly in the doorway. You, get over here. Brandon approached the bed. Margaret reached out and took his hand. You stayed, she said. Of course I stayed. You held my daughter while she cried. Brandon's throat tightened. How did you? A mother knows. Margaret's grip was weak but determined. You're a good boy. I knew it the moment I met you. You threatened to kill me. Those two things aren't mutually exclusive. She smiled. Now sit down, both of you. I'm tired of looking up. They sat. For a long time, nobody spoke. The machines beeped their steady rhythm. The night pressed against the windows. And in that small hospital room, three broken people held on to each other like survivors of a shipwreck. Because sometimes that's what family is. Not blood, not obligation, just people who refuse to let go. Margaret came home 3 days later. The doctors called it a miracle. The infection that should have killed her had retreated. The cancer that had been spreading had stabilized. For the first time in 3 years, the numbers were moving in the right direction. Grace cried when they told her. Brandon held her hand and cried too. He didn't care who saw. The day Margaret was discharged, all 50 Hell's Angels showed up at the hospital. They lined the hallway in their leather jackets, forming an honor guard as the nurses wheeled her toward the exit. Margaret looked at them with sharp eyes. What's all this? Mad Dog stepped forward. Just making sure you get home safe, ma'am. I don't need an escort. No, ma'am, you don't, but you're getting one anyway. Margaret stared at him for a long moment. Then she laughed. A real laugh. The kind Grace said she hadn't heard in months. Fine, but someone better buy me breakfast. Hospital food is garbage. The convoy that took Margaret Miller home was something the town had never seen. 50 motorcycles, one ambulance, a rusty Honda Civic, and a red Ferrari that looked completely out of place. They stopped at the Golden Cup. Harold had closed the diner for the morning. When they walked in, the tables had been pushed together into one long row. Plates of food covered every inch. Eggs, bacon, pancakes, toast. Everything Margaret loved. What is this? Margaret whispered. Family breakfast, Harold said simply. Sit down, eat. You've earned it. Margaret sat at the head of the table, Grace on one side, Brandon on the other, 50 bikers filling the rest of the seats. For the next 2 hours, they ate and talked and laughed. Stories were shared. Jokes were told. Big Tommy arm wrestled 3 different people and lost to all of them because he was too busy laughing to focus. Brandon watched it all with wonder. This was what family looked like. Not blood, not obligation, just people who chose each other. He'd never had this before. He never wanted to lose it. After breakfast, Grace walked her mother back to the trailer. Brandon stayed behind to help Harold clean up. You did good, kid, Harold said as they washed dishes side by side. I didn't do anything. The doctors... I'm not talking about the medical stuff. I'm talking about being there. For Grace, for Margaret. Harold scrubbed a plate thoughtfully. Most people run when things get hard. You stayed. I couldn't leave her. I know, that's what I mean. Harold set down the plate and looked at Brandon. You're not the same person who walked in here 2 weeks ago. I don't feel like the same person. Good, that's how it's supposed to work. Harold dried his hands. So, what happens now? Your week is up. Your father's waiting. Brandon had been avoiding that thought. The week he'd promised his father had ended 2 days ago. Richard had called twice. Brandon hadn't answered. I don't know, he admitted. I know I have to talk to him, but I don't want to leave. Even then, don't leave. It's not that simple. He's my father. He what owns you? Harold shook his head. You're a grown man, Brandon. You get to choose your own life, nobody else. What if he cuts me off completely? Then you'll be broke, like the rest of us. Harold smiled. It's not so bad, trust me. Brandon thought about that, about what it would mean to have nothing. No safety net, no inheritance, no guarantee that tomorrow would be okay. It should have terrified him. Instead, it felt like freedom. I need to talk to Grace, he said, before I decide anything. She's at the trailer. Go. Brandon found Grace sitting on the steps outside her mother's trailer. She looked exhausted but peaceful. Hey, he said, sitting beside her. Hey. How is she? Sleeping. First real sleep she's had in weeks. Grace leaned her head against his shoulder. Thank you for everything. You don't have to thank me. Yes, I do. You could have walked away a dozen times. You didn't. She lifted her head and looked at him. Why, Mom? Because you showed me what it means to be human. I told you that. I know, but there's more to it, I can tell. Brandon was quiet for a moment, trying to find the words. All my life, I've been surrounded by people who wanted something from me. Money, status, connection to my father. Nobody ever saw me. They just saw what I could give them. He took her hand. You were the first person who ever looked at me like I was just a person. Not a Hayes, not a billionaire's son, just Brandon. That's because you are just Brandon. The rest of it is just noise. I know that now, but I didn't before. He squeezed her hand. You changed me, Grace. You and your mother and Harold and the bikers. You all changed me. Grace was quiet for a long moment. What are you going to do? She finally asked. About your father. I'm going to call him. Tell him I'm staying. Staying where? Here in Nevada, near you. Brandon turned to face her fully. If that's okay, if you want me to. Grace's eyes searched his face, looking for something. Doubt, hesitation, insincerity. She must not have found any because she smiled. I want you to, she whispered. Brandon felt his heart expand in his chest, a feeling he'd never experienced before. Joy, pure, uncomplicated joy. Then I'm staying. What about your inheritance? Your family, no. You're my family now, you and your mother and Harold and everyone at the diner. He lifted her hand to his lips, kissed it gently. That's all I need. Grace's eyes filled with tears. You really mean that? Every word. She leaned forward and kissed him, soft and sweet and full of promise. When they pulled apart, she was laughing through her tears. My mother is going to be insufferable about this. Why? Because she predicted it. The first night you met her after you left, she told me you were going to fall in love with me. Brandon grinned. Smart woman. The smartest. They sat together on the steps, holding hands, watching the sun set over the Nevada desert. And for the first time in his life, Brandon Hayes felt completely at peace. The phone call with Richard Hayes happened 2 days later. Brandon sat in the empty diner after closing, Grace beside him, Harold pretending to clean the counter, but clearly listening. The phone rang 3 times before Richard answered. Brandon? Dad? Silence, heavy with everything unsaid. You didn't call, Richard finally said. You promised 1 week. It's been 10 days. I know, I'm sorry. Things got complicated. Complicated how? Brandon took a breath. Grace's mother almost died. I was at the hospital. I couldn't leave her. More silence. When Richard spoke again, his voice was different, softer. Is she okay, the mother? She's recovering. It was close, but she's going to make it. Good. That's good. Richard cleared his throat. Brandon, I need to know what you're planning to do. I'm staying, Dad. Staying where? Here, Nevada with Grace. Brandon heard his father take a sharp breath. You're throwing away everything. You understand that? The company, the inheritance, everything I built, I'm not throwing it away. I'm choosing something different. Brandon's voice was steady, calm. You built your empire because you wanted to matter. You wanted to prove that you were worth something. But somewhere along the way, you forgot that there are other ways to matter. Other ways to be worth something. Like washing dishes. Like loving people. Like being there when someone needs you. Like choosing connection over power. Brandon looked at Grace. She nodded encouragingly. Like being a good man instead of a rich one. Richard was quiet for a long time. Your grandfather used to say things like that, he finally said, before I pushed him away. I know, you told me. He was right. I was wrong. Richard's voice cracked. I was wrong about a lot of things. Dad. No, let me finish. Richard took a shaky breath. I've been thinking, ever since that day at the diner, about who I am, who I became, what I lost along the way. He paused. I don't want to lose you too, Brandon. You're all I have left. Brandon felt tears burning his eyes. You're not going to lose me, Rishi. Then what do you want? What can I do? I want you to accept that I'm not going to be you. I'm not going to run Hayes Enterprises. I'm not going to marry someone for business connections. I'm going to live my own life, make my own choices. And if those choices include washing dishes at a diner, then yes, even then. Silence again, but this time it felt different, less hostile, more contemplative. Okay, Richard finally said. Brandon blinked. Okay. I said okay, I accept it. Richard's voice was thick with emotion. I don't understand it. I don't like it, but I accept it because you're my son, and I've already lost too much by trying to control people I love. Brandon couldn't speak. Tears streamed down his face. There's one condition, Richard continued. What? I want to meet her, Grace, and her mother. I want to see the people who changed my son. Brandon looked at Grace. She nodded. They'd like that, Brandon said. I'd like that. Good, I'll fly out next week. Richard paused. And Brandon? Yeah, I'm proud of you. 3 words, 3 simple words that Brandon had waited 19 years to hear. Thanks, Dad, he whispered. That means everything. I know, it should have come sooner. I'm sorry it didn't. Richard's voice steadied. I'll see you next week. The line went dead. Brandon sat there, phone in hand, tears on his cheeks. Grace wrapped her arms around him. You did it, she whispered. We did it. Harold appeared with 3 cups of coffee. Sounds like we're having visitors, he said. Better clean up the place. Yet, despite everything, Brandon laughed. Richard Hayes arrived the following Saturday, but he didn't come alone. The limousine pulled up to the Golden Cup at precisely 10 a.m. When the door opened, Richard stepped out first, but behind him came Victoria, Brandon's mother. He hadn't expected that. Grace squeezed his hand. You okay? I don't know. They walked out to meet them. Richard looked different somehow. Less rigid, more human. He was wearing a simple suit instead of his usual designer everything. No watch that cost more than a house. No cufflinks worth more than a car. Victoria, on the other hand, looked exactly the same. Perfect hair, perfect makeup, perfect armor. Brandon, Richard said. Dad, Mom. Brandon nodded to each of them. This is Grace. Grace, these are my parents. Grace stepped forward with her hand extended. It's nice to meet you both. Richard took her hand warmly. The pleasure is mine. I've heard a lot about you. Victoria didn't move. Her eyes traveled over Grace with barely concealed judgment. The worn clothes, the calloused hands, the simple ponytail. Charmed, Victoria said flatly. Brandon felt his jaw tighten. Mom, what I said hello. You said it like she was something stuck to your shoe. Brandon, let's not. No. Brandon stepped forward. If you're here to judge her to make her feel less than, you can get back in that limousine right now. I mean it, Mom. I won't let you treat her the way I used to treat people. Victoria's eyes widened. In 19 years, Brandon had never spoken to her like that. Richard put a hand on his wife's arm. Victoria, we talked about this. I know what we talked about, but this is our son's choice, and we're going to respect it. Richard's voice was firm, final. Aren't we? Victoria looked at her husband, at her son, at the young woman standing beside him. Something shifted in her expression. Not acceptance exactly, but the beginning of something that might eventually become acceptance. Fine, she said quietly. I apologize. Old habits. Grace smiled. It was the most gracious smile Brandon had ever seen. I understand. Your son threw food in my face the first time we met. I figure I can handle some cold looks. Victoria blinked. Then impossibly she laughed. You're direct. I'll give you that. My mother taught me to say what I mean and mean what I say. Speaking of which, Grace turned toward the trailer park. She's waiting to meet you. She's been cooking all morning. Victoria's eyebrows rose. Cooking? Yes, she insisted. Said she wanted to show you what real food tastes like. Grace grinned. Her words, not mine. Richard laughed out loud. I think I'm going to like this woman. Everyone does, Brandon said, once they get past the death threats. The what? Long story, I'll tell you on the way. The meeting between Margaret Miller and Richard Hayes was something nobody could have predicted. They sat across from each other at Margaret's small kitchen table. Victoria perched uncomfortably on a folding chair. Brandon and Grace stood by the door watching. So, Margaret said, her sharp eyes fixed on Richard, you're the man who raised a monster. Richard flinched but didn't look away. I suppose I am. And now you're here because that monster turned into a man and you want to know how it happened. Yes, Margaret nodded slowly. I'll tell you how it happened. It happened because your son got down on his knees and washed dishes until his hands bled. It happened because he served strangers with a smile even when they cursed at him. It happened because he chose to be humble instead of proud. She leaned forward. In other words, it happened because he did everything you never taught him to do. The words hung in the air like a verdict. Richard's face crumpled. You're right. I failed him. I failed him in every way that mattered. Yes, you did. Margaret's voice softened slightly. But you're here now. That counts for something. Does it? It's a start. Margaret turned to Victoria. And you, the mother, what do you have to say? Victoria looked like she wanted to disappear. I don't know what to say. Then listen, Margaret's voice sharpened. You raised your son to believe he was better than everyone else. You taught him that money was the only thing that mattered. You let him become cruel and empty because it was easier than actually being a parent. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. That's not fair. Fair, you wanted to talk about fair, Margaret pointed at Grace. My daughter worked 70 hours a week to pay for my treatment. She sacrificed her dreams, her youth, her health. And your son threw food in her face because he was bored. She shook her head. Don't talk to me about fair. I'm sorry, Victoria whispered. I'm sorry for what he did. Don't apologize to me. Apologize to her. Victoria turned to Grace, tears streaming down her perfectly made-up face. I'm sorry, Grace, for what my son did, for who he was. Her voice broke. For who we made him. Grace was quiet for a moment. Then she walked over and took Victoria's hand. We can't change the past, Grace said gently. We can only choose what happens next. Your son chose to change. Maybe you can too. Victoria stared at the young woman holding her hand. The waitress, the nobody, the person her son had chosen over everything she'd built. How bizarre, Victoria asked. How do I change? Same way Brandon did, one day at a time, one choice at a time. Grace smiled. Start by seeing people as people, not as servants or obstacles or tools, just people. Victoria nodded slowly. I'll try. That's all anyone can do. Margaret watched this exchange with sharp eyes. When it was over, she turned to Richard. Your wife might be salvageable after all. Despite everything, Richard laughed. She's stronger than she looks. She'd have to be to put up with you. Margaret's lips twitched, almost a smile. Now, enough talking. I made pot roast. Sit down and eat before it gets cold. They ate together, all five of them, in a tiny trailer on the edge of nowhere. It was the strangest meal Richard and Victoria Hayes had ever experienced. It was also the best. 6 months later, everything had changed. Brandon worked at the Golden Cup full-time. Not because he had to, because he wanted to. Harold had made him assistant manager. He handled the morning shift while Harold took afternoons off to visit his wife's grave. Grace had reduced her hours. Margaret's treatment was finally paid off not by Brandon, but by a GoFundMe that Big Tommy had secretly set up. It had raised over $200,000 in 3 weeks. People from all over the country had donated. They'd seen the video. They'd watched Brandon's transformation. They wanted to help the woman who had made it possible. Margaret was in remission. The doctors called it a miracle. She called it stubbornness. I'm not dying until I see grandchildren, she told Grace. So get busy. Grace had laughed and thrown a pillow at her, but she'd also looked at Brandon with something new in her eyes, something like possibility. Richard Hayes visited once a month. Each time he seemed a little different, a little more human. He'd started volunteering at a homeless shelter in Vegas. Victoria had joined a charity board, a real one, not just a society event. They were trying. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy. But they were trying, and that was enough. 1 year to the day after Brandon had thrown food at Grace Miller, he stood in front of the golden cup with a secret in his pocket. Grace was inside finishing her shift. She didn't know what was coming. Nobody did except Mad Dog, who had helped Brandon plan everything. "You ready, kid?" Brandon touched his pocket, felt a small box inside. Terrified. "Good, that's well, it's supposed to be, Tiggy." Mad Dog clapped him on the shoulder. "Now get in there." Brandon walked into the diner. Grace was wiping down the counter, the same counter where she'd stood a year ago covered in food tears in her eyes while a stranger humiliated her. Everything was different now. Everything was better. "Hey," Grace said, looking up. "I thought you were taking the day off." "I was, but I needed to ask you something." "Okay, what?" Brandon walked toward her. His heart was pounding. His hands were shaking. He stopped in front of the counter, took a breath. "1 year ago today, I walked into this diner and did the worst thing I've ever done in my life. I humiliated you, degraded you, tried to make you feel like you were nothing." Grace's eyes softened. "Brandon, let me finish." He took another breath. "1 year ago, I was the worst version of myself, cruel, empty, worthless, and you looked at me when I was on my knees covered in shame and you offered me your hand. You helped me up. You gave me something nobody had ever given me before." "What? A second chance?" Grace's eyes glistened. "I don't deserve you," Brandon continued. "I know that. I'll spend the rest of my life knowing that. But I also know that I want to spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of you." He reached into his pocket, pulled out the box, dropped to one knee. Grace gasped. Her hands flew to her mouth. "Grace Elizabeth Miller, you showed me what it means to be human. You taught me that strength isn't about power, it's about kindness. You gave me a family when I had none, a home when I was lost." He opened the box. Inside was a simple ring, not expensive, not flashy, just beautiful. "I bought this with my first paycheck from the diner," he said. "It took me 3 months to save up for it. It's not much, it's not what you deserve, but it's real, it's earned, just like everything good in my life now." Tears streamed down Grace's face. "Grace, will you marry me?" For a long moment she didn't speak, couldn't speak. Then she laughed, a beautiful, joyful sound that filled the entire diner. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." Brandon slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. He stood up. She threw her arms around him. They kissed while the entire diner erupted in cheers. Mad Dog and the Hells Angels. Harold wiping tears from his eyes. Truckers and tourists and regulars who had watched this love story unfold one day at a time. Even Margaret was there, wheeled in by Big Tommy, tears streaming down her wrinkled face. "About damn time," she called out. "I've been waiting for this for months." Grace laughed and ran to hug her mother. Brandon watched them. The two women who had saved his soul. He had never felt so full in his life. The wedding was held at the Golden Cup, not a church, not a ballroom, a roadside diner on a Nevada highway. Grace wore a simple white dress. Brandon wore a clean button-up shirt and jeans. Harold officiated. He'd gotten ordained online the week before. 50 Hells Angels stood as groomsmen. Margaret sat in the front row, crying happy tears. Richard and Victoria Hayes sat beside her. Richard was holding Margaret's hand. They'd become unlikely friends over the past year. He visited her once a month. They talked about life loss and second chances. Victoria had changed too. Slowly, imperfectly. But she was trying. That was all anyone could do. Harold cleared his throat. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to witness the union of two people who found each other in the most unlikely way possible." He smiled. Most love stories start with a meet cute. This one started with a public humiliation and a death threat from a motorcycle gang. Laughter rippled through the crowd. But that's the thing about life. It doesn't follow scripts. It doesn't care about fairy tales. Sometimes the worst moments become the beginning of the best chapters. Harold looked at Brandon and Grace. "These two people taught me that. They taught all of us that." He turned to Brandon. "Brandon, Do you take Grace to be your wife, to love her, honor her, and serve her? And I mean literally serve her, because you're still on dish duty every Tuesday for as long as you both shall live. I do. Harold turned to Grace. Grace, do you take Brandon to be your husband, to love him, forgive him, and occasionally remind him that he used to be a complete jerk, but a redeemable one for as long as you both shall live? I do. Then by the power vested in me by the internet and the state of Nevada, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Harold grinned. Kiss her already. Brandon pulled Grace close and kissed her while the diner exploded in cheers and applause. 50 Harleys roared to life outside. A salute from the Hells Angels. Margaret hugged her daughter so tight that Grace had to remind her to breathe. Richard Hayes wiped tears from his eyes and didn't even try to hide it. And in that moment, surrounded by family, real family, chosen family, Brandon Hayes understood something profound. He had spent 19 years trying to be worthy of his name. Now he was finally worthy of something better. Love. 3 years later, a new restaurant opened on Route 66. It was called Second Chances Cafe. Grace ran it. Brandon managed the business side. Harold consulted when he wasn't busy spoiling their twin daughters. Margaret lived in a small cottage behind the cafe. Her cancer was still in remission. She spent her days playing with her granddaughters and terrorizing customers who didn't tip properly. Richard Hayes had retired from his company. He'd sold most of it, kept enough to live on, and donated the rest to charity. He visited Nevada every month. Sometimes he washed dishes. Sometimes he just sat at the counter and watched his son work. I'm proud of you, he said one afternoon. Brandon smiled. You've said that before. I'll keep saying it until I die. I have 19 years to make up for. The Hells Angels still came every week. They had their own booth now. A brass plaque on the wall marked it as theirs. Mad Dog had passed away the previous spring, peacefully, in his sleep. But his memory lived on in everything they did. On the wall of Second Chances Cafe hung a photograph. Grace and Brandon on their wedding day. Surrounded by bikers and family and friends, everyone smiling. Below the photograph in bold letters was a quote, "Respect costs nothing, but it can change everything." People came from all over the country to see it, to eat at the cafe where a waitress had been humiliated and a billionaire's son had learned to be human. To hear the story, to believe that second chances were possible. Because they were. Brandon knew that better than anyone. Every morning he woke up next to Grace, watched her sleep, marveled at how lucky he was. Every evening he kissed his daughters goodnight, read them stories about kindness and courage and standing up for what was right. Every night before he fell asleep, he whispered a prayer of gratitude for the Hells Angels who had forced him to his knees, for the father who had learned to let go, for the mother-in-law who had threatened to kill him, for the woman who had offered her hand when he was at his lowest, and for the moment 1 year ago in a dusty diner on a Nevada highway when Brandon Hayes had finally become the man he was meant to be. Not because of his money, not because of his name, but because of a choice. The choice to change. The choice to grow. The choice to love. That was the real inheritance. The only one that mattered. And it was worth more than all the billions in the world. On the last page of the cafe's guest book, a visitor had written something that Grace framed and hung by the door. I came here expecting a story about revenge. I found a story about redemption instead. Thank you for reminding me that people can change, that second chances are real, that love is stronger than hate. Below the message was a signature, a former monster trying to be human. Brandon read it every morning, and every morning he smiled, because that was the whole point, wasn't it? Not perfection, not forgiveness without effort, not happy endings that came easy, just the daily, difficult, beautiful work of becoming better. One choice at a time, one day at a time, one second chance at a time. That was enough. That was everything. And Brandon Hayes, former billionaire's son, former bully, former monster, wouldn't have it any other way.